Let's get started. All right. Yeah, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, turn your camera on, and welcome to the May Building to Net Zero Community of Practice. Um, Today we're just going to start with a quick land acknowledgement. So we respectfully acknowledge that our work happens across Turtle Island, which has traditionally been and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people since time immemorial. We recognize that reconciliation is a fundamental component to building net zero resilient communities. We are committed to strengthening relationships with Indigenous groups and knowledge keepers, knowing that reconciliation requires ongoing learning, unlearning, reflection, and action. We endeavor to listen to and learn from Indigenous peoples on an ongoing basis in the process of our work. And today, I wanted to do a little something different and share my screen in a resource that I've known about for a while, but haven't really dug around in too much. So this is the whos.land website, and you can kind of scroll around, and I'm located here in Ontario, Southern Ontario, and you can see all the indigenous groups that lived on this. So you can kind of look at the Williams treaties, the Robinson Huron treaties, or if you go out to other areas of the country, you can kind of see out on the East Coast, West Coast, and lots of that variation up in the north as well. So I encourage you all to kind of dig around and take a look at your area. Has lots of interesting information. If you look in, say, let's go into, yeah, sort of Toronto, where many of us are. It seems to be freezing on me there. But yeah, I guess you can look at some information on those indigenous nations and learn a bit more about that. And I encourage you all to do so. I'll put that in the chat for everyone. Yeah, oh, so you already did. Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, to get started, I really wanted to do something a little bit different here today and show everyone some of the incredible work that these three builders, developers, and renovators, industry folks that we have with us on some of the work that they've done on high performance and net zero homes. And I've asked them to kind of show some of the great work they're doing and give some recommendations and advice for municipal governments on who want to use the high performance buildings to meet their goals of reducing long-term energy costs, climate impacts, or health impacts, or any other goals that come along with some of these initiatives. And so we're really excited to have three amazing speakers. I'll first introduce Jeff, who's the Director of Responsible Development from Northcrest Developments. Jeff leads the responsible development strategy for the redevelopment of YDZ, the 370-acre Downsview Airport lands in Toronto. He brings 2 decades of experience with sustainability leadership positions at BOMA Toronto, the Canadian Green Building Council, Sustainable Buildings Canada, and Toronto 2030 District. I'd also like to introduce Peter. Peter Darlington is the president of Solar Homes, Inc., a leader in high-performance retrofits. His family home was the first net zero renovation labeled by the Canadian Home Builders Association, CHBA. Peter has done dozens of net zero or deep energy retrofits, most recently an affordable housing 3-unit detached townhouse residential building, which did achieve CHBA net zero labeling. He's also involved with the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction with the intent of designing resilience into high-performance retrofits. His goal is to make scalable, community-level, high-performance retrofits a reality. And we also have Scott. Scott Pickles is the managing director at Urban Equation and Windmill Development Group. He leads sustainable real estate advisory services to integrate capital, strategy, governance, and environmental performance to deliver financially viable, climate-aligned development outcomes. Scott brings a full spectrum perspective to the built environment, having worked as a project architect on LEED Platinum developments, a development manager delivering multifamily and mixed-use housing projects, and municipal capital planning leader overseeing billion-dollar infrastructure portfolios, and a national consulting practice leader advising institutional owners and private developers across Canada. So welcome, the three of you, and Scott, I think you're on first. Please take it away.
Right. The most important test. Can you hear me? And you can see the presentation.
Yep, looks good, and we
All
can.
right. Fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to come and talk with the great group, which, as we saw some names, I recognize a few of you and great co-panelists. We've enjoyed prepping for this. Um, today really I wanted to the presentation is set up sort of in two parts. Is one giving you some information about who the Windmill Development Group is and some of the work we have done, as well as give some recommendation on how we feel that municipalities can encourage the private sector to build better. There's way too much information on the slides, but I've done that on purpose because I anticipate this will be circulated later. So I'm going to blitz through it a bunch so that I don't steal time from my co-panelists. But for those of you who may not know about Windmill Development Group, we believe that we are one of the most sustainably privately held real estate investors and developers in North America. We extend over 20 years um, in our history, and you can see some statistics on the screen as well. When we describe the Windmill Development Group, it's right now it's comprised of the development arm. It's obviously the group that is creating and developing largely multifamily residential product, and their aspiration is to transform conventional development into much more innovative investments. Urban Equation has that opportunity because we're part of the group of companies to assist them in figuring that stuff out. But then at the same time, have the opportunity to share that with the marketplace, whether it be private development or public institutions. We also have a One Planet Living fund where we are partnering with, to invest in projects to help accelerate adoption. In terms of Urban Equation, more specifically, the group that I directly have oversight in, we believe strongly that siloed decision making is what really kills the opportunity to innovate. And as a result, we have three primary service lines: sustainability strategy, carbon advisory, and of course the traditional real estate advisory, where we feel that by addressing and looking into these expertise, we can create integrated decision, which help increase the overall performance of investments. As a Windmill Development Group, we also follow the One Planet Living framework. This lots of interesting stuff here. Where LEAD may be a focus on building specifically, the One Planet Living actually helps as a much more sort of an umbrella entity, which starts to consider aspects such as health and happiness, equity, and local economy. So a much more broader way to perceive what sustainability is than more the traditional sense. And this is where we apply this to all of our projects. This is just way too much detail, but we've been doing this for a while. We have a history of being first in on a lot of different types of projects and types of technologies used. From the Urban Equation side, you'll see that we've worked with many different organizations to help advance green development standards, such as Guelph, for example. So in terms of getting in terms of why and how do we actually go about doing this, we believe strongly that this whole pursuit of decarbonization is delivered when those sustainability aspirations are embedded early in a project. I think oftentimes we as technical individuals think that they come in at the design, which is true, but really that vision setting, that target, and that early feasibility helps sets the groundwork to more detailed technical integration and eventually delivery. The second statement here is, when sustainability is added late, it obviously becomes a cost premium, and where the perception it's a premium. When it's integrated early, it's just part of this development strategy. No, how does Windmill do that? We as part of our process, embed standards into our thought process and our feasibility. So, for example, we have something called a Windmill Impact Standard. It is what sets us, what sets a clear direction in terms of achieving where do we want our building performance to achieve. That's critical to set the target so that when we work with trades and consultants, we have those design specifications and the technical requirements really established early. This is not something that we then revise and say, oh, we'd like you to also consider. The trick now, of course, having established a strategy, is that we need to obviously verify through delivery. We track those milestones throughout the construction. And probably most importantly is embedding those requirements into the contracts. Now, this might sound very typical. I think the trick is really in that feasibility stage, that just because you can do it doesn't mean it's going to work. So being very clear that through our impact center, we believe that these things work for us in terms of the product and the market that we're chasing. And so as a result, we don't feel that this is an additional cost. Um, Diving now into the sort of our latest project, Halsa. It's located in Etobicoke. It was a 9-story, 58 rental unit project built of mass timber. We used the Intelligent City product line. You can see some of the sustainability targets that we are aiming to achieve: the platinum, tier 3, One Planet Living. It's a cool project. You'll see, I'll start this.
Sorry, there's no audio.
It's okay. I think what it's saying is the words that you're reading.
Oh, okay, all good then.
But there's some cool music that you missed, of course. No, I just wanted to show you that just because obviously we talk about mass timber and the modern methods of construction has become a very hotbed topic with governments and Build Canada Homes. This We've leaned into this a couple of years ago in the sense that we felt that this method of construction would allow us to achieve a lot of our embodied carbon targets. We've been able to realize this project. It'll be finished very soon, and it's fascinating to see the opportunity for us to erect quickly housing that is a high performance envelope. You'll see some of the notions on key features on the side about precision built, the comfort of the actual building as a result of that precision, and the efficiency of the speed. The trick with mass timber is logistics, which is a whole nother presentation we can talk about, but not as easy as it looks, but great potential. Just giving you some, for those of you who enjoy seeing some details, a scissor staircase we've incorporated into the building, which has gained a lot of interesting attention. The one with this sort of two circles shows how the two cassettes come together, and the far right picture is effectively from the truck on site. Lift to place is about 3 or 4 minutes. So pretty interesting group where we feel that the technology of mass timber, coupled with the current housing demand and crisis, coupled with body carbon targets, is a great opportunity as we look forward. Just some information about how the high performance outcomes coming from this system allows us as a developer to achieve some of our low carbon targets. We have a high performance envelope, which is effectively being built off site, clicked into place online. A great story about the project is that we have geo exchange happening on the property. We had to upgrade, I believe, our electricity service because we needed to operate the crane only for construction. So we're doing some post debriefs on this, which is proving to be quite exciting. Okay, so I got to keep going. Now we'll flip over to, so how can you encourage others to do what we're doing and maybe even better? I think we've all heard about this analogy of the carrot and the stick. Those are both two great mechanisms that we know about. I think oftentimes governments think about the stick only, but we know that high performance buildings are driven by incentives, certainty, and regulation, not just regulation alone. And it's this certainty, which I think for a developer is so critical, is that whenever there's a risk or an unknown, that means costs. So having the ability to avoid late surprises, or having one policy or rule that should fit all, or just telling what the developer needs to achieve, can be problematic. When developers don't fully understand either a policy or technology or process or level of support, that adjusts value. And so these cost, time, risk, revenue, operations, those are all pieces where if you can provide greater certainty to a developer, in terms of the performance aspirations you have, there's a chance that they're going to be able to actually achieve it versus just adding all this cost perception without the ability to incent or encourage it. So regulation can kill a lot of innovation very quickly. Now we all agree, I think, we'll see what everyone else thinks on the panel, but I believe that there is a need to raise the standards in the way that we build, but it has to be done in a path that makes sense. So make sure that as you talk to your developers in your municipalities, there's a clear path to how to establish the outcome. Also read the outcome, not the technologies. I think I'm always one for the conversation about we should tell people where we want to go, but let them have that ability to decide. Not every solution makes sense in every application. The comment here is about making incentives bankable. So the ability to actually provide an incentive that results in a financial benefit is something we'd highly recommend. And of course, use approvals as delivery tool. I think this is the last slide, but as you raise the standards, they're important that you raise them in a way that they can actually be delivered. However, still stay ambitious, but make sure that they're predictable and most importantly, financeable. And I think I'll jump there. I think that's almost dead on.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott. Over to you, Peter.
Great. Thanks, Scott. That was really good. Hi, my name is Peter Darlington, and I'm happy to speak to you today about our experience in Part 9 city-owned net zero renovations. I believe owner-operators such as cities are uniquely positioned to leverage total cost of ownership and ongoing operational costs while considering large capital expenditures. So to be clear, I'm not saying all affordable housing should immediately transition to net zero or high performance build, but that there is an opportunity when existing envelope and mechanical systems are coming to end of life and being replaced anyways. So when you're replacing all those components to the building, you very much have an opportunity to improve the energy performance of those buildings. But once that new siding has been installed, that opportunity has been lost, or those new windows have gone in, or that new mechanical system has gone in, that they're stuck there for 20 years. So what I'm suggesting is that perhaps owner operators can have funding and plans in place so that when they are doing recladdings or large capital expenses to existing structures, that they have a plan and some funding in place to implement that. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to walk you through a recent project that we did for the city of Calgary. It's in its affordable housing portfolio. This was a pilot project with the goal of CHBA net zero labeling. The CHBA label can only be acquired with strict building performance and comfort metrics combined with the ability to generate all of its energy on site. There are several different labeling paths, especially in Part 9 buildings, but I have a soft spot for the CHBA labeling because I've been with that labeling group for about a decade, and I was instrumental in getting renovations added to that labeling program. And I think that, you know, just being part of the Canadian Home Builders Association and having that assurance that the contractors are all properly vetted, insured, they're in it for the long run. They're not just, you know, back of the tailgate contractors. I think the CHBA puts a lot of credibility towards the quality of the build. They have done about 3,000 buildings have gone through that CHBA net zero labeling program. And I think that they've really found a sweet spot between building envelope improvements and mechanical advantage, and seeing that you don't have to go all the way with the building envelope. You can use smart systems as well, but building envelope certainly plays a large part in it. And I think who better than the builders themselves to design a Part 9 labeling program for high performance builds. Solar Homes has been doing this a while. We did the first single detached about half a decade before anybody else. We've done dozens of projects and tried all kinds of different wall assemblies and approaches to get to net zero. In the decade we've been doing this, the tech has improved significantly and everything has become easier. Things like solar panels are putting out more wattage per foot. You can get load share devices to handle these larger loads. There's been quite a bit of advances over the last decade. We share everything we do publicly through social media. So if you want to check out my LinkedIn, you'll find a bunch of details there and all kinds of stuff that we do. This is the city of Calgary. We just did the 3 units attached townhouses. As mentioned, it was part of a pilot program for the city of Calgary that was supported by the CHBA towards Net Zero Renovations program. It's the first MURB to achieve a CHBA Net Zero Renovation label. And as far as I'm aware, it's the first Net Zero MURB in Canada. There were many different peoples and organizations involved in this. IDP is a big part of how these projects come together. And I thank everybody that was involved in that. And I think this went really extremely well for the conditions. If I were to pick a building to do a net zero renovation on, I would not have picked this specific building. I would have liked the city to come to the contractor before they picked a property to work on. This one had some significant challenges that went over and above the standard net zero retrofits. That included the electrical service running through a paved parking lot, undersized roof overhangs, fire separation requirements, and big rocks like boulders below grade, which were a real pain in the ass. Oh, pardon that. Despite all the challenges, we did get it done on budget, on time, and with the performance metrics that we set out to achieve. This is the wall assembly. The original building had 2 layers of siding on it. Those were both removed. There was a self-adhered air barrier applied to the entire building to achieve air tightness. And then a modified Larson truss assembly was built to accommodate 10 inches of insulation. So this wall assembly is going to reduce the total heat requirement for this building by about 75%. That's a lot of energy. Each one of these units right now could be heated with 2 hair dryers. They're so efficient. They have total control over their air and their thermal barriers. Hardy siding was the cladding, and new doors and windows were installed. We use advanced mechanical systems, heat pumps throughout. So the outdoor unit is a 1.5-ton Daikin, which is slightly oversized, but it's still a pretty small unit. The hot water is serviced by an 80-gallon heat pump hot water tank. We used a larger tank because these are residents and they probably don't want to wait for their hot water to recharge. The heat pump hot water tanks take a bit longer to recharge than traditional nat gas. We did an electrical service upgrade to each of the units going from 60 amps to 100 amps. And we put in HRVs for fresh air delivery and humidity control. This solar system in Calgary will generate about 10 grand a year worth of energy. So, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's not nothing either. And if these owner operators can capture some of this potential value, this particular system, like just the system on its own, pays itself off in like 6 or 7 years with 25-year warranty. So it's a pretty good deal. At the end of the project, we delivered to both the city of Calgary and the residents healthier, quieter, more resistant, more resilient, and more efficient homes. Hail resistance has been built into the projects with hardy siding, class 4 shingles. And the building wraps should be virtually maintenance-free for 30 years. There is, in this affordable housing complex, some confusion over who will pay the bills. That used to be that the city was responsible for the nat gas and the tenants were responsible for the electricity. And since we've disconnected the nat gas, it's just an electric bill now. And the way it works is you generate a lot of energy in the summer, so you produce a lot of credits. You actually get paid during the summer, but then you consume a lot of energy in the winter, so you have to pay for it, which could be a little tricky with tenants coming and going. You wouldn't want to walk into like a $400 bill for January cold snap coming into this. So I think it probably will make sense for the city of Calgary to take over all the utilities on this, and then they will manage both the credits and the debits. And this property will run with 0 energy costs year over year. So I understand it can feel like a complicated task to add insulation under a reclad, but when a building is getting to the point of needing new windows and cladding, this is the opportunity. This is just a line item to a reclad. These older buildings are not even close to modern building code requirements. In fact, it wasn't until 1978, that's the year I was born, that the measures for energy conservation in new buildings was first introduced to code as a voluntary model. So these older homes and the occupants deserve to be brought up to at least minimum new building code requirements. What would be the perfect net zero renovation neighborhood? It would be something like this. Just to the north of this property is overhead power lines. So you have easy access to the service upgrades. You got lots of space. These buildings are all old and in need of new windows, new cladding, new shingles, the whole package. They need a full wrap anyways. They have great solar exposure. You could do a property like this for a significantly smaller price tag than per door than the three that I have done in the earlier slides. I don't have a crystal ball and I can't see the future, but I cannot imagine a future where the cities are not taking responsibility for the energy required to operate their portfolio or the opportunity for energy generation on the significant square footage available to them. I believe the city of Calgary is ahead of the game. And even though the Calgary pilot at 180K per door could not be justified with simple financial ROI, I believe it is the beginning of something huge. Is this a magic bullet to solve climate crisis and affordability all at once? Probably not. But these buildings operate emissions neutral. And in this case, with all the carbon sequestration of the cellulose, the construction was carbon neutral. Also, there will be zero energy bills going forward for these units. So I think it does make sense to at least start a conversation when you're looking at major renovations. If you'd like me to be part of that conversation, reach out to the contact info above. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Next, we're going to go over to Jeff, and then we'll get into some questions and some fireside chat discussion afterwards. Take it away, Jeff.
Great. Thanks so much, Nathan. I am going to show some stuff. So I'm pivoting in real time. Right. So listen, I've got a ton of stuff I could show you. I'm going to try to fly through things quickly and take a slightly different angle than I originally thought I was going to take. I just want to give you a little bit of context. I'm the Director of Responsible Development for Northcrest Developments. We're a really weird developer. This is our property right here. It's a 370-acre former airfield in the middle of the Greater Toronto Area, basically in North York, right near Yorkdale Mall, the Allen Expressway, and the 401. The land was a former airplane manufacturing site in operations for about 96 years before the Second World War. It was purchased in 2018 by PSP Investments, which is the fourth largest pension fund in Canada. It's the public service pension for all the federal government workers, RCMP and military. They created Northcrest Developments to be the master developer. So this is the only project that we have, and it's a really big one. I'll give you just a bit of a sense of what it is that we're undertaking here. In a lot of ways, this really is a city in a city. On almost 400 acres, we're providing homes for over 50,000 people, over 20,000 jobs, over 70 acres of new parks and open space in 7 interconnected neighborhoods. We're building Belleville, Ontario, in the middle of the GTA, and all centered around this long 2-kilometer pedestrianized runway that will be the backbone of the community. And for those of you in familiar with Toronto, 2 kilometers to sort of put in your head is Yonge Street from Bloor down to Front. So it's a huge area that we're re-envisioning. Over time, it will evolve into a mixed-use community with significant employment lands, but obviously a huge amount of residential, huge amount of open space, great transit connectivity with 3 subway stations around the site, a GO station at the north end on the Barrie line that takes you right to Union Station in 20 minutes, and obviously major highway access with the 401 corridor and the Allen Expressway. Just across the railway tracks from Downsview Park, which is an over 200-acre urban park. And so as we sort of reimagine this, my role was really to sort of wrap my head around all of the environmental and social goals and try to get that into the development plans, like Scott and the One Planet Living, tried to put together a set of frameworks based around all of the targets, requirements, aspirations, and values of this project, identify all of the impact areas that were materially important, and try to figure out how we set guidance to the project team, whether you're working on a district plan or a road or a park or a building. How do we push you towards better performance? It is insanely complicated. As you will all be aware, trying to advance your own sustainability mandates at the municipal level, these are really complicated things. And I'm not going to talk too much about this, but what I will say, there's a lot of stuff we can measure and we know how to do. There's a lot of stuff we don't know how to do. We're learning how to do. We don't know if we can afford it. We don't know how to measure it. What's really important is having this real strong vision about the things that are important from the community feedback, from working with the city, and from building, focusing on really building a unique and strong place. And these 5 pillars of responsible development guide a lot of our thinking in the project. I'll give you some imagery just so you get a little taste of what we're working on. Our first district is the hangar district, centered on the existing hangars. We've got about 1.5 million square feet of manufacturing space where they were building planes. At the top is what it looks like today. A bunch of hangars surrounded by asphalt, 3,500 surface level parking spots, and eventually this will be a heart of a new employment zone focused on innovation and building a really dynamic new complete community around that. This is the render fetish section of the presentation, where we just give you a taste of what these really kind of interesting spaces that are heritage, but not that old heritage Victorian era that you might be familiar with in a distillery district or Liberty Village, but this kind of interesting post-war modernism that is probably unsexy right now because it's not that old, but in like 30 years is going to be really super cool. And we'll have a lot of nostalgia and really think about how we reimagine these spaces into dynamic urban environments. Okay. But what I really wanted to talk about, and I think this is really important, because when I started 3 years ago with Northcrest, my job was a lot easier because we had a whole policy world that was really pushing for sustainability. And so a lot of my job was saying, like, guys, we need to figure out how to do this because we have to do this. And the market's moving that way and lenders are moving that way. And we've seen a slow retreat of the mandate around sustainability over the last little while. And obviously that makes my job a lot harder. But I will say it's forcing us to do something that was probably long overdue, which is, as developers, we need to get much more disciplined in understanding where the real value was in what we were doing. And we couldn't just do it because we had to. We had to really understand value. And not just value in an academic sense, value in terms of what can we recover for our investments, because affordability is such an issue and financing is such an issue and costs were getting so high. And I think, I spent 15 years in the nonprofit space with the Green Building Council groups that got advocating for this. And a lot of times I think we were guilty when the market was really strong about pushing for stuff that didn't necessarily make financial sense. And really leaning into the value proposition without really understanding it. And now we're looking at that really hard and trying to figure out what works. So I wanted to share with you actually a little bit of internal thinking that I've done for my own team when they're questioning, like, why are we doing this? What is the value of this? And I think it's important for cities when you're looking to set programs for the private sector to deliver performance, that you understand what's actually motivating them. And so I literally said, like, but can we afford it? This is the question. Well, like, oh, that's nice. I like what you're trying to do, but is it going to be too expensive? This is kind of the standard developer refrain. So I want to talk about this. And I also encourage the city to really think about the value that you get out of driving sustainability and how you recover that value and who you expect to pay for it and what that looks like. The first thing is like, but it's expensive. It costs more, and a lot of this is anecdotal. And so the first thing we want to do is say, is it really more expensive? And a lot of the times, things that are expensive, we're often, because it was the first time someone ever, they had experience, but it's the first time they ever did it. Costs are coming down. Whether it's batteries or renewables or things, the market is getting better at doing this. Sometimes there are a number of parts of the cost equation you're looking at upfront costs, but not life cycle operating costs. Or you're approaching it too late where you're just adding sustainability as an add-on and not really fundamentally rethinking how you approach the project. And Peter talked about integrated design and really starting with these premises. It doesn't always have to be more expensive. So let's explore that and really figure out if that's true before we make that claim. The second thing is compared to what? And so a lot of times when we do cost analysis, we're backwards looking. And again, costs change over time, prices change over time, energy costs fluctuate, and so we want to be forward looking as well as looking in the rear view mirror to figure out about costs, and look long term. And I talk about things like carbon prices. Are they here? Are they not here? We don't know. I think the long run trajectory is gas is going to be more expensive over time. I think offsets or carbon costs eventually are going to be here in the long run. So we want to make sure we're considering those risks, at least in a sensitivity analysis way in our pro formas. May not be material, but it's a thing. It's real. Cutting waste. Sorry, my graphics are all weird here. The one-time sustainability always aligns with the economics is when we cut waste, and that can be reducing energy waste. It can be reducing material waste. It can be thinking about the efficiency of our structures to reduce unnecessary sort of over-engineering, thinking about the efficiency of building massing, thinking about the efficiency of our street grids and our networks, and making sure that we're not building things as big as they could be. We're building them as big as they need to be, and that's really important. Right sizing, particularly in cities and master planners. Vehicle burden is a thing that I'm pushing. The cost that we spend in cities in terms of real material cost, but also opportunity cost on things that we could do that would be more productive and more beneficial just to service vehicles. And that's parking minimums, that's type G loading, that's road right of ways and lane widths for large format vehicles. It's a real material cost that gets worked into our design. Oftentimes the city's asking for that space. It's land we have to give them, and the city, sometimes takes the approach of, well, we're only going to get this land once. Let's ask for as much as we can get, not as much as we need. And that has a real cost, and that gets passed on to the home buyers. So anytime we can cut waste, we're seeing a direct economic benefit. We're seeing a direct environmental benefit, less material, less carbon. Wonky slide transitions. Time is money. It's not all hard cost. If we can expedite approvals, if we can look at advanced manufacturing, the costs are not on the material side; they're all on the process side. So we really have to think about that. Okay. We also need to think about leveraging trade-offs between systems. It's not always obvious where the savings are and where the value is. It's that question of how much insulation do you put in before it's no longer worthwhile. And there's diminishing returns to adding insulation until you can tunnel through the cost barrier and maybe actually transform in other systems. So, do you keep insulating until you can radically change your HVAC strategy and bring those costs down, where it's no longer an incremental addition, but it's transformative? Can you look at, investing in, innovative service models to reduce capital costs, like things like sharing economy, things to reduce space. We're thinking a lot about housing affordability and what people really want in their living environments, to have great places to live that are also affordable. And one of the key ways is to think about public amenities and shared services and moving away from private amenities. Can you give people better quality of life more efficiently with less space? So we think about trade-offs and we capture those trade-offs. And do we know how to do that? Future savings are important. This is one of the tougher ones when we talk about OpEx and CapEx. As developers, we pay the upfront cost, and typically we can only recapture that upfront cost in a couple ways: this on the showroom floor of the condo sales center, or through rents. We don't usually pay utility bills. When I've done my cost analysis on building zero carbon building, Toronto Green Standard Tier 3, if I do a 30-year total cost recovery, I can break even in 30 years in that building. pretty easily. The problem is I only have means of recovering about 5% of the capital cost through utility savings and efficiency, right? The common area utilities, everything else is passed through. So if we don't have the ability to capture those future savings, then we can't justify the upfront investment. So this is where innovative financing models like on-bill financing or commercial PACE programs would really play an interesting role in enabling those upfront investments that have real material long-term savings that we just can't capture. We got to manage risks. Risk is value, doesn't always get recognized, and there's cost risk, things like utility price volatility, obviously regulatory risk. We have these sort of dangling regulatory mechanisms like building emissions performance standards that may come and we don't know what they look like, but they could have material impacts. Climate risk to properties, and we're starting to think about how we price climate risk in our value of buildings. And we want to market the value. This is maybe more traditionally where people move. If we're building green, we want to talk about it, and we want to try to capture market value that views this as a premium product. Now, that's a little bit tricky in a market where there is no premium to capture, or affordability is an issue, and we don't want to sort of inflate prices to motivate ourselves to do these. But it's a real thing, and we look at lower tenant turnover. We look at higher retention rates and higher rent per square foot as being things that we need to capture if we're going to do this. We certainly want to expand the market, and that's where things like accessibility and inclusion come into play. The bigger you make the market, the better, the higher the demand, the better you're going to be able to sell it. And we want to seize incentives. And that's, I put it last because we often lead with the idea that we need to incentivize this behavior. I think materially most developers don't count on incentives to make this work. They can't rely on them, but they'll certainly take them if they can. So we grab incentives anywhere we can, but I think we really need to figure out how to make this work in the market. So, that's kind of it. And that's where we hunt for value, and we're trying to find value everywhere we can and close the loop on that. And yeah, so thanks very much. Sorry about my weirdness.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Yeah, great presentation and really good thoughts from all three of you. I just wanted to start with a question of the positives. So, we're in a housing crisis, we're in a climate crisis. We need to build a lot more housing, and municipalities want housing. Builders, developers, renovators also want housing. Like what's going well right now, and what do we think, we can build on to kind of, bring municipalities and industry closer together to make sure that they're working in lockstep rather than opposing each other. If you want to start with you, Scott, and kind of go in the same order.
Sure. So it's a big question, as they all are. I would say that the development industry is really good at being innovative and figuring stuff out. And I say that because if there is a market opportunity, there'll be a push towards addressing that, and of course, making a profit and providing value. And I think in some ways, it's as blunt as not getting in their way to deliver what the market opportunity is. I think sometimes there's an over excitement, sort of as I think Jeff, you mentioned, of just adding layers in and just throwing stuff in because, hey, we know that there's a housing gap, so we're going to not only ask for housing, we want it to be blue, located here, and here's a bunch of restrictions. I'd flip it almost the other way, and just a way of getting it is just showing support, being encouraging, accepting, and being willing to embrace a housing advancement, and then creating a relationship and a conversation where you can actually start to talk about aspirations of performance, and then letting the industry help guide the how do they get there, but not lowering your standards at the same time.
Yeah, I think renovations were kind of the new kid on the block from the high performance perspective, and I'm really optimistic about the future. 10 years ago there were zero net zero renovations, and now I go to conferences with hundreds of attendees. So just the public perception, public interest. All the tech that's involved in putting this stuff together is getting cheaper. more available. HVAC contractors getting more comfortable with heat pumps. Solar panels have doubled the wattage in 7 years. Um, I think there's still quite a ways to go, and I think there's no better carbon capture than updating an existing building. And super optimistic about where this goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't typically view the relationship between the city and developers as as adversarial. Um, but I do think that there I do think there's a lot. I mean, time is an issue, and so I think that time and sort of protectionism, and I think that one of the bigger challenges that we have is that we want to do good, that we're afraid of making mistakes, we're afraid of moving forward. When we're talking about housing urgency, I mean, speed to market is a real thing, and reducing friction along the way is really important. And there are points at which, if we're holding out to get more, we may stop the train. I mean, that you just have to weigh that, which doesn't mean that we don't need to be ambitious in what we expect to get out of the industry. I think that's really important, that we have high standards and expectations, but we just have to be careful that the approach of implementing that isn't slowing things down, and especially in a time where there's a lot of weight, drag in the marketplace. So, you know, it's also just maybe a fundamental question as well, because I've sort of had this conversation a lot of times about, like, well, this development's happening. We need to get something beneficial out of it. And it's a question, is housing beneficial in itself? Is that a net benefit? And I think it's really challenging. I mean, I think there's a lot of politics. I think there's a lot of social community pressure. Like, is growth good for a community? Is it not good for a community? Who's it good for? These are really tricky questions to wrap your head around, but I typically view housing, I mean, housing in and of itself is a good. How do we promote housing as an outcome and get it built really quickly? And then recognize that these broader opportunities to create public value, it's a collective value thing, and we just have to be cautious about putting too much of that on the new home buyer, who ultimately will be paying for it, because it's never the developer. You put the cost on the developer. It's not us who's ultimately paying for it, but we end up asking new home buyers or existing home buyers to cover a lot of the cost of providing these public benefits that just drag on this. So can we share in that? Are there ways to make that happen? Are there ways to use some of the tools that the city has available to its disposal, like local improvement charges, in different, I won't say incentives, but ways for the city to have some skin in the game on these projects and see them through and benefit from these projects being realized.
Yeah, yeah, good point. And yeah, feel free to jump in, any of the three of you, if you have any points. But the next thing I wanted to kind of get to is around some of those new technologies. Yeah, maybe heat pumps or modular housing. Some of them are a little bit more established than others, but some are becoming more and more mainstream. And other new technologies that you're kind of seeing out there as part of the green building space. What do you see as being adopted right now and is really a big part of the next wave of all housing, and what do you see as maybe something that's not so cost effective right now?
I mean, I can jump in and maybe go backwards. They'll throw this over to Scott, because they'll have some thoughts on this stuff as well. But what I will say, on the technology side, be a little bit cautious. There's a lot of interest in big systems change technologies right now, that don't plug into our existing supply chain, and that's like modern methods of construction are a good example of that. There is a promise there. There's something there that we think we can deliver better performance, cheaper, using advanced manufacturing. It hasn't materialized yet, predominantly because it's not really the way we build. Every building that we build is still pretty custom. Mass production is all about scale and economies of scale. And obviously, there are logistical challenges around shipping big modules and buildings to different sites and installing them. But getting to scale, like if you think about a car manufacturer who builds a car, I mean, they build thousands and thousands and thousands of these models, and they build a shared platform on which they're actually building multiple models of cars, of which they're selling thousands and thousands of thousands, and they retool these things every few years. And cars are self-transporting in a lot of ways around the market. When you're talking about buildings and every building's unique, it's really hard to hit those economies of scale, even for a project the size of Downsview. And there's other complexity that we're not a vertically integrated industry. So we essentially have to go out and like figure out what we want to build a building with before we've designed the building, and we don't know what it's going to cost and how to compare it to other stuff. So we haven't figured out the supply chain thing, but there's a role that the city can play in scale. And I think that if we want to adopt those things, that we really have to think about how do we sort of enable that. And I think we're starting to see it a little bit through programs like Build Canada Homes, where the public sector can play a role in creating demand to get us over this scale hurdle, but also really thinking about the way we approve buildings and projects. I mean, if you think about it, every building has to go through an insane permitting process to get built, even if it's the exact same building that we've built dozens and dozens and dozens of times before, right? You still got to go through building permits. You still got to go through inspection. I mean, no one would ever suggest that every car that rolls off the line needs to go through a crash test before it gets approved to go on the road, right? We evaluate these designs, we test the technology, we get comfortable with it, and then we approve it. And so I think if we want the industry to hit the scale that is needed for it to become affordable, we have to think about how we can also look at the regulatory side and do things like pre-approval of standard designs, or expedited approvals for things that are repeated. And I mean, maybe then we'll start to get there, but until then, I'm a little skeptical, maybe, or cautious, lukewarm in my optimism about how fast the market's going to change.
I'll add to that. One of the best parts about working in real estate, and one of the best parts about real estate needing to touch a physical environment, our communities, neighborhoods, is that they're all different. And I don't think there's one size that fits all in terms of this equipment's going to work, do this, this, and this, and you're set. For Windmill, our floor is LEED Platinum. And then based on that performance and that strategy, we go figure out what are the best mechanisms to do that. There are some general rules of thumb, like your 30% window wall ratio, making sure that the windows are placed in places that makes the building look habitable. That it's all dark all the time, but we're really shooting to a performance outcome. And then every building is kind of different. We do have some similarities, obviously, between them, but that's why incenting one, I don't know, Peter, you might say the difference. Incenting one system or one solution might work, but might not always work. Except for unless it's like net zero and you're in Calgary and you want to do it all everywhere.
I mean, I'd love to, but no, the reality of the fact is that it doesn't work everywhere. You're going to have buildings in all kinds of different situations in all kinds of different jurisdictions. The way they interact with the outside environment. A house in Vancouver is totally different than a house in northern Saskatchewan. The way they interact with the local power authority is completely different in every situation. The carbon effect of the renovation is going to be different in every jurisdiction, and the ROI is going to be different in every jurisdiction. So it is very tough to say that one size fits all, but I don't know if you're familiar with, in Europe, there's a program called Energy Sprung, and what they do is they build pre-built panels, and they fly them into neighborhoods, and they drop them by the hundreds over these buildings. But I mean, the reason I think that works so well in Europe is that you've got 100 buildings that are the exact same running down a street. And we don't have that in Canada, at least from my experience. There's such a mixture of buildings, which is great. But it makes it very tough to try to go modular or pre-assembled. And we'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, yeah, thanks a lot. And I know we just have 4 minutes left here, but I wanted to get to one last question. Is any last thoughts or ideas for, let's say, your municipality values high performance buildings and wants to start out with that incentive type of angle and give out some type of incentives for industry working, higher than code. So what are incentives that are valuable? Which ones might work, and which ones do you all think could be something that's, should be pursued by municipalities as opposed to others?
I'll just
I
mention
can,
a couple things. You go ahead, Scott.
no, go ahead, Peter.
The city of Calgary has recently put out a heat map, so it shows which buildings are losing more heat through their roofs, and it's nice for homeowners to be able to see that, as well as maps on PV potential. So I think those are both kind of useful tools for homeowners. But if municipalities were going to be putting out incentives, I think for me, just the dollars per gigajoule reduction, might be a good way to go. Then you're not picking winners or losers, you're just getting results.
I would add just that any incentives that help remove risk, awesome. And that might be anything that helps accelerate approvals or construction time. Those are great. That's kind of what I would suggest.
Yeah, I've got two that I think, one on the new construction, commercial PACE financing programs, I think, and there's some interest here. I know availability across the country is a little bit different. Being able to tie private third-party capital, so an open PACE model, to the property tax bill for collection, helps securitize that loan, stretch it out over time, lets you transfer that loan with the property. And there's money out there that wants to invest and is looking for security. If we can, that's one tool that I'm really looking at, both for retrofit incentives, also for covering the green premium and rationalizing, that 5% cost premium that we might see on the new construction side. On the low rise side, though, what I would say is that deep energy retrofits are important. Certainly at end of life, there's a huge opportunity to really retrofit buildings, but there's a ton of buildings that would benefit from partial decarbonization, electrification of heating systems, heat pumps, pretty simple measures that are turnkey. The problem is it takes too long to acquire those houses into municipal programs. We're waiting for them to come to us. We're dangling incentives. You got to go get an audit and do a thing. If you want scale, and we've seen this with the home energy loan program in Toronto, it's too slow to roll out. You need to take a campaign approach to this at really mobilizing action. I would be going neighborhood to neighborhood and saying, listen, we're doing blower doors in your neighborhood for a week. It's deeply discounted because they're going to have the crews there and they're just going to go door to door and they're going to give you your report and they're going to do it as quick and easy as possible. Book, here's 3 days, book a slot, create some urgency, focus on those things that are pretty universal. Heat pumps are pretty easy. Heat pump water heaters. There's some really cool stuff around thermal storage, batteries for hot water. Basic insulation, not the deep building stuff, but just you got to roll it out at scale, and be less worried that every project is doing it perfectly, and the due diligence and worry. If there's some free ridership, who cares? You're capturing volume. And is every building going to benefit immensely? No, but you're going to get enough wins that you're going to see a material difference. And I think, we spent a long time working on residential programs where we are fussing over the details and realizing, like, guys, we're talking about 1% of a market that's even engaging with us. We're not even having the right conversation. So mobilize, mobilize, mobilize. Think about how you can get out to many, 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 many homes with less perfect programs. But much bigger.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. I'm going to have to cut us off there, but yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Peter. Great presentations and discussion, and see everyone next month. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.